on the spectrum of all the different ways your body can look, realize that it's not us individually, it's either the patriarchy, the media, whatever it is, the powers that be, and you give yourself the grace to just exist. There's like, our bodies don't bring value to our lives. We bring value to our bodies. I've learned that we are all very hard on ourselves and we need to give ourselves more grace because we're going to waste our lives trying to fix something that isn't broken to begin with.
Welcome to Our Latina Lens podcast, where we elevate the work and stories of accomplished Latina and Latine photographers in the U.S. I'm your host, Monica, and this podcast is part of our wider Our Latina Lens community. I am thrilled to share this interview with Portrait and Boudoir photographer Cinthia Jaimes, also known as Cin. She's the owner of Cin Photo Studio in the Oak Cliff neighborhood of Dallas, Texas. Not only does Cinthia create gorgeous images, she's on a mission to use her own life lessons to build up others through her skills as a photographer. When you follow Cin on social media, you quickly see that she has a huge heart for her community and is all about supporting and elevating those around her. A content warning for our listeners: gun violence and thoughts of suicide are discussed in this episode. You can find exact timestamps in the show notes where we discuss these issues. Those are available in your podcast player. As Cinthia and I discuss, protecting your mental health is extremely important. Please take care of yourself. If you're struggling with thoughts of suicide, please contact the National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline by calling or texting 988. All the artists and entrepreneurs that Cinthia references, including where to find her work, are linked in the show notes and on our website at ourlatinalens.com/podcast, where you can also sign up for our newsletter. Today we're talking to Cin of Cin Photos. One of the things that really attracted me to her work was the high quality of her work, the beauty of her images. If you have not seen her Dia de los Muertos campaign for Cadena Collective in 2021, it was spectacular. Cin has been an incredible supporter of Our Latina Lens, and she is your ultimate hype woman. So if you are looking for someone to create images of you that make you feel good about yourself, this is your person. This is your photographer. Bienvenida, Cin.
No me chifles. Thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to us having this conversation and just getting to kind of have a little deep dive together for so long. So I'm so excited to finally be here.
Yay, me too. So I read that you studied photojournalism. Take us to your shift from photojournalism to portraiture and boudoir. Was there an experience that caused that shift, or was it part of a larger exploration of genres?
Thank you. I first picked up photojournalism back in 2015. I have always known that I really wanted to be a voice for my community, especially growing up in a predominantly brown and Black neighborhood. The only media that my community would receive was often related to crime, related to poverty, related to violence. So I wanted to share people's stories, whatever they may be, and hold space for them. I would invite myself to protests and rallies and photograph folks there. So I did that for almost a year and a half. And then I began to shift after the Black Lives Matter protest that Dallas had in July of 2016. That Black Lives Matter protest in Dallas in 2016 began like I'm assuming many others had before it. There was a lot of pain in the air because of recent events that led up to the protest. And there was also a really great sense of community. We were all there hurting together, but we were all there fighting together. And then eventually we were heading out of the protest when we heard guns fire. I remember this moment so vividly of just coldness running through my body as the shooting kept going on and going and going. And then the increasing sound of sirens, because every police officer every fire truck, every ambulance within the center of downtown, everyone was making their way to the scene at the same time. It was inescapable. You couldn't hear the person in front of you. For the half hour that my husband and I spent trying to get out of downtown, we had no idea what was going on. We saw officers kneeling next to us, so we knew we were close. Finally, we were able to find a little alleyway where we were able to finally leave downtown and go back home. That was one of the last protests I photographed for a long time. I remember putting my camera down after that protest and not picking it back up for almost 6 months, just because I had this realization of this is often what photojournalism is. It is chasing bad news. It is chasing pain. And obviously these stories deserve to be shared, and we need to bring awareness to some of these situations. But after that protest, I had to accept that I was a very sensitive person. I am a highly sensitive person. Although I am a firm believer that those stories deserve to be shared, I no longer believe that I was the person to share them. Like I said, I didn't pick up my camera for 6 months after that. And so it wasn't until 2017 where I finally felt comfortable again picking up my camera. And it was to do portraits because I had a ton of friends that knew that I was a photographer, that I had a camera. And so slowly folks started to ask me to take portraits for them. That is where I just started to dip my toe into all different types of genres of portraiture. I did families, I did events, I did weddings. I mean, everything you could think of, I did for almost 2 years until I really began to find my footing in boudoir. During this time, I was beginning to address my mental health issues and address my body image issues that I had with myself. So there was a lot of internal healing going on for myself, where I was finally giving myself the space to feel my feelings, process them, and heal them one at a time. As I was beginning to make this transition professionally, I was also kind of transitioning out of a place of self-loathing and out of a place where I felt like every part of me needed to be fixed. Unbeknownst to me, that healing work that I was beginning to do started to pour into my photography. And it began to show up in how I photographed other people, specifically how I photographed other women and female identifying people, how I could hold space for them to explore a side of them that we often get shamed for exploring for ourselves or not reserving for the consumption of men, without the male gaze and without any shame or guilt or judgment. By the summer 2019, I was finally full in boudoir and portraits. And now in 2020, I was lucky enough to be able to quit my corporate job, originally in hopes of just focusing on my mental health, because the pandemic had definitely taken a toll on me. But eventually it was like one of those things that when you remove the barrier that you held onto, the universe finally starts pouring into all the things you asked for. So as soon as I quit my corporate job, within a 2-month period, I was completely booked for photography and had even found my dream studio in my own neighborhood. It was just like a snowball effect. It just didn't stop, and it hasn't stopped. It's almost 2 years now. It hasn't stopped, but I definitely no longer feel like it's out of my control. I definitely feel like I'm finally steering the snowball down the hill.
And it's been such a joy and pleasure watching, even in the short time that I've been following you, your growth in that time. Can you describe a time where you were maybe in a session, or do you just felt that click? Like, this is my genre. I am in my flow. This is what I'm meant to do.
Yeah, I definitely have. I feel it a little bit in every boudoir session that I do. And I feel it most when I can tell that a client has felt the reward for stepping outside of their comfort zone. I feel it most. This is what I'm meant to do when I see other women feel happy for having had the courage to show up for themselves.
Can you talk a little bit about what the genre of boudoir is? I've seen a lot of misunderstandings online. I've seen even in photography groups, there have been conversations that have blown up about boudoir. How do you see boudoir? What is it that attracts you to that genre?
Boudoir for me is the genre of photography where folks can be vulnerable about all of their physical body and their relationship between their physical body and how they view themselves internally. It is sensual. And I like to say that there's a difference between sensual and sexual. For me, sensual is suggestive. It has a lot to do with your emotions and definitely how you want to portray yourself, versus sexual often has been seen as what you can do for others. For me, I like to focus boudoir shoots on women reclaiming their bodies and their relationship with their bodies. As a Latina, I grew up in a very conservative home where we never spoke about sex. We never had to talk. We had a piece of clothes together ourselves. I was taught from a very young age that my body and sex had to be reserved for the consumption of my future husband. And sometimes you grow up really believing that, really thinking, I trust the people that said this to me, so it's got to be true. And then I hit my early 20s and it just started feeling off. I got to go step outside of my bubble, outside of the people that believe the exact same thing, and began to question what it really meant to own my own body, to what consent meant for me, and what I believed was worth waiting for, or who got to choose what to do with my body. So for me, boudoir is just you reclaiming your body as your own. A lot of women that I photograph in boudoir sessions struggle with body image issues. So it's an opportunity for them to see their body with more grace outside of their control. I don't know if you know this, but a lot of folks that struggle with body image issues, when they look in the mirror, they subconsciously contort the way that they stand or pose so that they can adjust the way they look in their reflection, which is why there's this disconnect between how people see themselves, especially in reflections, and how they are photographed by others. Because when you are photographed by someone else, you can't control necessarily the camera angle, and you don't know, you don't have like a live footage of what exactly you look like, which is why often folks feel really disappointed when they're photographed by a friend on their phone, because it's not how they would adjust and tweak their body image. But for boudoir shoots, it's an opportunity to release all the expectations that are placed on you and your body and just get the chance to reclaim it for yourself.
That sounds really powerful. And I can imagine that's a powerful experience for your clients, that you have all this knowledge and that you've brought your own healing to the space to help others reclaim that. You mentioned you grew up in a Latina household. Latina is a word that means many things to many people. How do you identify culturally? And please share any other identities that you hold that might also influence your photography journey.
Yeah, I definitely identify Latina or Latinx. I am a Mexicana. I was born in Mexico, just outside of Guadalajara. I feel like I gravitate more towards Latina right now, because it feels a little sticky when I say that I'm Mexicana sometimes, at least from my experience speaking to other Mexicans in the US. So I was born in Jalisco in Mexico, but I migrated to the US when I was a child and I was raised here. So I definitely felt the struggle of not being Mexican enough for my Mexican family, because I grew up with the American culture, and not being American enough for the rest of the country. I grew up with my first language being Spanish, and even then my Spanish has always kind of sucked. It's always kind of been a little rough. So I definitely feel judged when I speak Spanish. And then I have a little bit of an accent or a stutter when I speak English, because I do think of the words in Spanish first. So I prefer Latina because it feels like it's just a good mix of a Mexican immigrant who was raised in the States, but at heart, I am a Mexicana.
Thank you for sharing that. Definitely relate. How have your identities, how has your journey affected your creative process or your creative journey? How does it influence you, or how does it show up in your work?
So the way that my identity has influenced my journey is that it made it hard to start photography. I think that I would have definitely picked up photography a lot sooner if my Mexican family and my Latino family gave me the opportunity to explore a creative field instead of discouraging it out of their fear that I would not be able to have a successful career in a creative field. I went to high school and got a full ride to college to do biology pre-med. And I went off to to Texas A&M here and did my freshman year and hated it. I realized really early on that I was either not cut out for it or that I was just not as interested in that field as I had expected to be. And that was really hard on my, teenage self because I did not have a plan B. I was that perfect Mexican daughter, straight A's, never caused any issues, had a good head on her shoulders, was very academic. And I went off to college to become a doctor. And I remember the disappointment my family felt when I dropped out after 1 year and didn't have any backup plan. It took me a couple of years after that to just gain my footing again and give myself the opportunity to drop the shame of academics not being the way I wanted them to go, to give myself the opportunity to explore something else. And it's at this time, it's really like funny. I don't know if it's like haha funny or like funny weird, but after I dropped out of college, I spent 2 or 3 years not knowing what to do, just working regular jobs, trying to find a new path. Because again, I had no plan B. I was very self-assured that I was just gonna do the one thing I wanted to do. During this time, my biological father came back into my life for the first time in all of my years. My biological father is a photojournalist in Mexico. So naturally, you can imagine a teenage girl being told this and it being used to discourage her from a creative career, that I didn't want to be anything like the man that had abandoned me. So I forced myself to do anything but a creative career. But he came back into my life as I was being encouraged by other friends that I worked with to pursue journalism, since I was very community oriented. And he's the one that suggested that I pick up a camera so that I would be more likely to get gigs because I could do both the photography and the writing. This was summer of 2015-ish, and he made it out to look like he was about to buy me my first birthday gift leading up to my birthday. And then he ghosted me on my birthday. So out of spite, I went and bought my camera myself. And that's how I finally gave myself the opportunity to explore a creative career.
Sometimes we get there by encouragement, and sometimes we get there as I'm going to show you.
Yeah, for sure.
It sounds like when you started your creative career that your family was not so sure about you having a creative career or even exploring creative avenues. Where are they now? What kind of support or what kind of reaction do you get from them now?
My family was definitely very hesitant when I first picked up a camera and when I began shooting. First, out of fear for my safety, as I was photographing protests and rallies in Dallas. And then when I did shift to portraiture, they saw it mostly as a hobby. I think that sometimes our community needs to see someone do it to believe that it can be done. Especially when you're first gen or when you're the first person within your community to do something or to be interested in doing something. If there hasn't been someone that looks like you, that's come from the same path as you have, it's really hard to imagine how accessible that career, that field, that goal could be to you. So for the first few years of my portrait journey, my family just thought of it as a hobby. And as I began to pick up boudoir, there definitely was a little judgment because I had to explain the difference between boudoir and pornography, the different intentions, the different boundaries, and that it was okay for women to explore this side of themselves and enjoy this side of themselves, even if it was just for themselves and it was never going to be shared with anybody else. Thankfully, though, after a year or two, they finally began to come around, which is why I was very shocked at my mom's encouragement to pursue photography full time when that time came for me, when it was my time to cross that bridge. And since becoming a full-time photographer and opening my own studio, it's no longer a question of could you be successful doing something like this or doing anything adventurous or entrepreneurial, and more of how are you going to get it done? So I'm very grateful that my journey has been full of a great support system. I know that that's definitely not something everyone has the privilege of having, but that it has also helped my family heal a part of them that couldn't imagine themselves doing something creative or doing something that they hadn't seen others do before.
What has it been like as a Latina to have your own studio? Can you talk a little bit about that piece of what it means to be a photographer and a businesswoman?
Sometimes I feel like being a Latina with my own studio is no big deal. It is just me in a little space taking photos. And as I go online to network or find education, I really begin to realize how the majority of examples of photographers with studios are not people of color. And that's when it really sinks in of what possibly seeing a Latina with a studio does for the rest of the photography community. It's been very hard to be a full-time photographer. It's been very hard to run a studio because I've never done it before. I've never had the opportunity to mentor or shadow another photographer that had, especially not another Latina photographer. To be the first to learn all of these things along the way while I'm trying to juggle all of this has really put almost like blinders on me. I'm just focused on what's ahead. I hadn't had the opportunity to realize the impact that my example has on my community. I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful that people can learn from me, can see themselves in me, that having a studio and being a full-time photographer and following your dreams is not just a dream. It's a plan. And once you see someone that looks like you or someone that has the same journey as you do it, it feels more accessible. It feels more in reach, even if it's just by example.
We put out a list in one of our newsletters, and I found five Latino studios. I think there's more. If there's more, please contact us. But I found 5. And if you're in Texas, support Cin's studio. And you talked about not having very many Latina people of color who are doing photography education. So like many people I've been interviewing, when something's not there, people are saying, well, I'm going to create it. So what are you working on in that area?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. I am working on launching a photography education YouTube channel. It's something that's been in my heart to do for years now. And I've mentioned it to my audience for years now. I didn't even notice it back then, but I taught myself photography on YouTube for the majority of my career as a whole. I learned photography on YouTube, and it wasn't until recent years where I was finally making a little extra change that I could invest in photography education. And what I've noticed now is that the predominantly almost all photography education is by white instructors or white content creators, which is totally fine. They're amazing. I learned from them, like they know what they're doing. But there's something special about being able to learn from someone that you can relate to on another level. And I think it's very important to remember that we need different perspectives in photography and in every single field. And my perspective as an immigrant, as a woman, as a Mexican immigrant who was raised in the States, as a Latina, it impacts the way I work. It impacts my relationship with people. And in me just showing up and me just sharing what I already do, it can help people, it can help other photographers grow and see themselves in my same shoes. I remember when I first started learning photography on YouTube, the majority of photography videos on YouTube were made by men, obviously white men, but majority men. And at the time, there was maybe 5 female photographers that I knew of, and 4 of the 5 were white women. So there's plenty of space for us. And that's actually something that I hear often. I always hear when it comes to the photography industry of how oversaturated it is. Like there's no point in picking up a camera or doing YouTube or creating content online because it's already oversaturated. But oversaturated with who? Because there's definitely place for photographers of color because there historically has not been. So if you are a Latina or a photographer of color and you're scared of showing up because you've been told time and time again that there's already plenty of photographers, please do not listen to those people. There's plenty of clients, there's plenty of work to be done, and the field needs you.
Yes, the field needs you. That is so beautiful. And I absolutely agree. A reminder to listen to our next episode when Cinthia takes us behind the scenes and into her thought process as she created 3 of her most significant images. Don't miss her image tour episode. Can you tell us a little bit how your journey, your creative journey, has affected your life perspective? What you've seen through your lens, the women that you've photographed, the people you photograph, how has that experience changed your life perspective?
That's a beautiful question. I have been photographing women for 5 years in boudoir. And what I've learned from my clients is that we are so hard on ourselves. It doesn't matter if you're thin and white or if you're plus size and brown. Everyone that I have photographed, 99% of the time, struggles with self-image issues. At first, it was hard for me as a fat woman to hold space for thin women that were felt insecure about their bodies until I realized that the same system that has shamed me and made me feel lesser than because of my body is still the same system oppressing them. Their feelings are valid on the spectrum of all the different ways your body can look. Realize that it's not us individually, it's either the patriarchy, the media, whatever it is, the powers that be. And you give yourself the grace to just exist. There's like our bodies don't bring value to our lives. We bring value to our bodies. I've learned that we are all very hard on ourselves and we need to give ourselves more grace because we're going to waste our lives trying to fix something that isn't broken to begin with. I could pull an album out that I have that has photos, a couple photos from my teenage years that managed to survive this long and a lot of photos from recent years, but there's almost nothing from my early 20s because I felt too self-conscious about having gained weight to ever step in front of the camera, whether it was with friends or professionally. Now that I've had the opportunity to do some healing when it comes to my body image issues and to really learn to love myself as I am, it makes me so sad to know that early 20s Cinthia is not documented in photos. I think we always look back at ourselves with kinder eyes, and it makes me sad to know that I was unkind to my early adult self. And I think a lot of us can relate to that in some degree. There's definitely, whether it's postpartum or weight gain or weight loss, whether we're just not where we thought we would be in life, so we feel really unworthy and we don't feel like it deserves to be documented. A lot of us are missing chunks of our lives from photos that we can look back to because we were so hard on ourselves. So whatever it is you're going through, however it is that you feel about yourself right now, please remember that future you is going to look back at this time and look at you with so much kindness in their eyes. So please give her something to look back to.
Thank you for sharing that. That was really beautiful. And I'm so happy for you to have had that journey, such a special one and one that you share with others. I wish you were close. I want this kind of hyping up so I could go into your studio and be hyped up like that. Because I definitely have eras in my life where it's similar feelings. Can you tell me a little bit about how do you approach your image making? Your images are really creative. They are gorgeous. They are varied. And I definitely see over time that you're pushing yourself. You are not complacent. You are not, a photographer who just keeps doing the same thing. What is your creative process to come up with your images?
As a portrait photographer, it's my job to capture the very best in people because these shoots are something that don't happen often in people's lives. I like to be extra. So I always like to tell folks when we're shooting to imagine themselves as a telenovela villain because telenovela villains know exactly who they are. There's no doubt in their mind. There's very little insecurity there. And we all have a little telenovela villain in us, When I'm creating these portraits for women, I want them to see themselves in a way they may have never seen themselves before. I want them to realize that this very same body that they felt insecure about, that they hated maybe, that they were unkind to, is the very same body that's going to create these beautiful portraits and hopefully help change their perspective. It's really easy to look at someone's portfolio and think that everyone is a supermodel there. But at least for my portfolio, the majority of my clients are real women. What I hope to do with everyone is to take them out of their comfort zone and guide them every step of the way so that they learn to be comfortable outside of that comfort zone, and they learn to expand those boundaries in a way that they consent to, that makes them feel empowered, that makes them feel like they're regaining territory in their lives. I personally believe that there shouldn't be a difference when you photograph or pose people depending on body type. I believe that that is low-key fat phobic. Because
Or high
there
key.
shouldn't be,
Or high key
yeah, or
fat
high key. Because there shouldn't be. I think that oftentimes what people mean when they say that these poses are flattering for curvier women is that the poses slim the woman down, which is fat phobic, because why are we trying to slim women down? Why are we trying to make women smaller? When I'm creating portraits, I want to challenge clients to step outside of their comfort zone, to discover new boundaries, and to see the body that they have a hard time with sometimes, or that they have been unkind to, in a different light. Because my goal outside of taking beautiful portraits is that hopefully everyone walks away seeing themselves in a new light and with kinder eyes, because they're going to carry that confidence and that empowerment and that energy with them. And hopefully they're going to pour it into others as well. So it'll create this ripple effect of women pouring into women and giving everyone the grace to be kinder to themselves.
You have some t-shirts that you have put out that say Sin Miedo. Can you talk about why you chose that as your merchandise for your studio?
Yes. In 2020, when the pandemic hit, there was a lot of uncertainty in everyone's lives, definitely in mine. As I transitioned from working from home, I really began to struggle with my mental health. I had to put my personal photography business on hold while I worked my corporate job. And with just so much anxiety about where the world was going and everything that was happening in my personal life, I really quickly began to spiral. I got to a place where I was so low, I was beginning to have suicidal ideation, where I wasn't necessarily in a place where I was going to endanger myself, but the boundary that keeps you from even considering it was dwindling. And so, as the pressures mounted, as my depression got worse, it was really easy for my mind to say, you wouldn't have to struggle with this if you weren't here, and could be clever like that, even though it was not clever. And I remember the exact feeling of knowing that that was a problem and not being able to connect my mental to my physical to ask for help. I remember struggling right next to friends and feeling this immense sadness and wishing they would just know so that they could ask. Because if they asked, for some reason, I would feel less of a burden to them. So I struggled and spiraled for months until I began to crack. And I remember one day during the workday, I was having a little breakdown during my lunch period. As I was picking myself back up and getting ready to go back to work, my mom called me. And my mom is that stereotypical Mexican mom that will tell you to just keep on pushing, to put the emotions aside and be grateful that you're working, because it is a privilege to be able to work, especially during this period of the pandemic. So many people were being laid off because of the uncertainty. So I definitely felt the pressure to hold on to that corporate job as long as I could. And I really loved my corporate team. They were amazing women. They definitely helped mold me into the business owner that I am today. But I couldn't shake the sadness. So one day when my mom calls me, I finally broke and I spilled my heart out to her, and I told her everything I was feeling and everything that was going on. And I cried to her like a baby, and I was afraid of her invalidating my feelings, as a lot of maybe Mexican or immigrant parents do. And I was so gratefully surprised when she validated my feelings and she held space for me. And that's when she said, Mija, la vida la tenemos que vivir sin miedo. Nada merece tu paz así. And so with that, I physically felt the weight that I was carrying fall from my shoulders. My mom told me that we cannot live our life in fear. And I was living in fear. I was living in fear of losing my corporate job. I was living in fear of getting COVID. I was living in fear of taking the leap of faith that I knew I desperately wanted to take, but no one had taken it before me. I had no idea how if I fell, I had no idea how to pick myself back up. Or so I thought, just because the fear of taking the leap to begin with is overwhelming. But I just felt so validated when my mom spoke those words to me that I got the courage to quit my corporate job like that week. And it was so scary to quit the corporate job without a plan B in the beginning of a pandemic. But it was one of those things that really helped put so much life into perspective. As scary as some risks are to take, they are absolutely worth taking. And they're so worth taking that they're worth any possible failure. I think, I don't know if it's a perfectionist in me, the oldest daughter in me, that failure was so scary at the time. But failure is part of the process. If I had quit and my photography business hadn't picked back up, I would have just found another job. And then I could have, come back to that dream later with more experience and a different perspective and different strategy. My mom really spoke that courage into me, and it helped me not only take that first big leap of faith, but the thousands that I've taken since. Because I think that that's something we don't talk about a lot when we are talking about being courageous in our lives and in our business. It's never just one leap of faith. There's the scary one that's the first one, and then there are thousands after. And what you learn is that the fear or the risk doesn't get smaller. You just get better.
I'm so into what you're saying. I totally forgot my next question. That was so beautiful. And I think I got so absorbed because that's something I need to hear right now. So thank you for that.
I'm here to give it to you.
I have seen that you are engaged with beautiful community collaborations in your community, for your community, with other business owners. Can you speak a little bit about maybe a impactful or significant collaboration that you've been a part of?
Thank you. I feel like there's so many. One of my proudest community collaborations I've done so far has definitely been with two of my best friends, Maria and Elba. In 2018 and 2019, we saw that there was a big need in our community for professional resources. A lot of the professional networking events that we had all been a part of had been predominantly white, had been expensive to attend. You had to pay to attend. There was always an inequality of accessibility to these events that's intention were to help uplift your career. So we got together and we hosted two events. The first was Headshot for the Homies in 2018, which I can't believe is that long ago. We wanted to provide professional resources and a networking opportunity for our community without the intimidation of what a lot of predominantly white networking events have had. So that's why we intentionally named it Headshots for the Homies, because we wanted folks to not feel intimidated to come and network, make new friends, make new professional connections. We were very gracious to have had Elevate here in Dallas donate their space to us to help us host the event. And it was definitely an event that went so much better than we could have expected, only because we really went into it with just a dream, just a vision of what it could be. And we were so fortunate to have our community believe in us and pour into the event so that it could be something beautiful for so many others. So we were able to provide free headshots for everyone that attended. We had a bunch of other vendors that donated their time. And so we had a little bit of a vendor market. We had the chance to have a couple corporate sponsorships so we could provide food for everyone. And it felt like just such a success to see that although it is hard work to put on community events, it doesn't have to be some kind of elaborate thing for it to have an impact on your community. It's one of those things of you only see one type of networking event, let's say, and it's like black tie, super intimidating, and you don't see a lot of folks that look like you at those events. So you feel like you don't have a space there. So we made our own table for it. We made our own space for it so that our community can have those career resources available to them and have the opportunity to make new partners and friends that can always look out for each other as they're traveling through their career.
Are there any Latina businesses that you would like to shout out and let our listeners know about?
There are so many. Some of my favorite Latina businesses right off the top of my head are obviously Cadena Collective. I love my friends, Ale, May, and Leslie.
Sure, I'm wearing today because I learned about them through you and I love their stuff.
I love them. Another friend of mine with Luz y Tierra candles. They are Mexican artisanal candles. I love them. If you're in Dallas or if you want to, if you're able to shop online, Coco Andre Chocolatier here in Dallas is amazing. They're a Mexican-owned chocolatier, and I do believe they do some shipping, I believe. If you like tortillas, organic tortillas, Pinola Blue is based out of Kansas, and they have blue corn tortillas that they work with farmers in Mexico to help import. So they help sustainable farming, but also help a community of farmers in Mexico. I feel like the majority of my friends are Latina-owned business owners. Okay, I'm going to shout out my friend Fresa Thrift. She is a vintage shop owner. She does a lot of curated work too online, and she's amazing. She's one of the first people that helped me kind of come into my style now in recent years to really own the body that I'm in. I feel like when I gained weight, I just dressed really frumpy because I didn't see a lot of curvy women like me dressed up. So she's definitely helped me find my style and be able to dress how I want in the body that I have now.
Yay. And knowing you, I know you have a long, long list. So when you follow Cin, you will see that there are many, many, many businesses that she supports and shouts out on a regular basis. Are there any favorite Latina photographers that you think we should know about?
So one of my favorite Latina photographers is my sweet friend, Stephanie Rodriguez. Her handle is Steph's Photography Texas on Instagram, and she's amazing. It's so funny to me how I had always had this community, this big community of Latina photographers in my area. I feel like I know so many Latina photographers in DFW, and yet that's never represented in the photographers we see leading the industry or leading online educational spaces. Because I probably follow like over 100 Latina photographers just from this area alone. So it's never that there's been a lack of female photographers or Latina photographers. It's just there's a barrier, whether I don't know if it's us mentally or a mixture of whoever has authority over these educational spaces that we never see ourselves represented there.
We're going to lift each other up.
Yeah. So one of my favorite Latina boudoir photographers is Ariana Rodriguez. She's also based out of DFW. She is amazing.
And let's do one more.
Oh, okay. And one of my newest favorite photographers is Divine Brujeria on Instagram. Her name is Jude. She is actually now my retoucher. So I'm very glad to partner with an Afro Latina to help expand my business and mentor her as she grows as well.
And what's next for you?
I would love to really lean into a photography education position. I really want to fill the gap that I see when it comes to Latina photographer educators to provide free and accessible resources on YouTube and on other platforms and help influence other women to be kinder to themselves and their body and hopefully heal some of the body image issues and body dysmorphia that we struggle with. I am kind of in like almost a transitional period personally because I would love to open a photography studio that's rentable for just photographers, especially one that has equipment for photographers that haven't had the opportunity to invest in some equipment like lighting equipment or some other props. But I also really want to move to California, preferably in a year or two. And specifically, I would love to move to the Bay Area.
Come on
So
over.
I'm ready. So I'm kind of almost at that fork in the road of what's next. Within the next year or two, I might either be moving to San Francisco or I'll be opening a larger photography studio that can be rented out for photographers or events here in Dallas.
All right. Shout yourself out. Where can people find you and your work?
People can find me on Instagram and on TikTok at Sin Photos, or they can check out my website at cinphotos.com.
And everyone that Sin has mentioned will be linked in our show notes, so you can find all those links right in your podcast player. Thank you so much. It's been such an honor, and it's always so beautiful and wonderful to talk to you. And we look forward to continuing to work together in the future.
Thank you so much for having me. The honor was all mine.
I really appreciated when Cinthia spoke to how we can internalize messages about our bodies and then have entire portions of our lives that are not documented. I wish my younger self could have heard and understood that. What resonated with you in this conversation? Please go to Apple Podcast or Spotify and let others know what you loved about this conversation with Cinthia. Also, be sure to turn on your notifications in this app so you don't miss when Cinthia's image tour comes out. She will take you behind the scenes of some of her significant images. Gracias for listening. Our Latina Lens podcast is produced, edited, and hosted by me, Monica Aldarondo Lugo. Our theme song was created by Matthias Muller. Our logo was designed by Tumpa Mystery. Thank you again for listening. L'ancla Creative.